The stars around Fenris screamed the night he returned. Not with light, but with absence, constellations guttering out like embers drowned beneath ice-black water. For 10,000 years, the sky above the Sea of Claws had known storms, warp auroras, and the howling laughter of things that should not exist. But this was different. This was the sound of a predator inhaling after a very long hunt. Somewhere beyond the veil of the Eye of Terror, something ancient had turned its face homeward. The first to feel it were the rune priests, their runes shattered in their hands, screaming warnings in tongues older than the Imperium. The world spirit of Fenris stirred, restless as a wounded beast, its glaciers cracking, its oceans churning with memories older than history. Wolves lifted their heads and howled, not in fear but in recognition, as if a scent carried by impossible winds had finally reached them. The Wolf King was coming back. Once Leman Russ had been the howl at the Emperor's side, the executioner clothed in fur and fang, a Primarch forged not for mercy, but for ending wars that could not be won gently. He laughed loudly, drank deeply, and fought like the storm itself. Yet beneath the savage myth, there had been a mind sharpened by instinct and sorrow. When Horus fell and the galaxy burned in the aftermath, Russ did not rest. He gathered his sons, spoke words never recorded, and walked into the Eye of Terror to hunt something that could not be killed by armies. That was the legend. What the Imperium remembered, what the Eye remembered was different. Time does not pass in the warp. It coils, festers, feeds. Centuries can pass in the space between heartbeats, or a lifetime can be crushed into a single scream. Russ entered that realm whole, a Primarch in full wrath, carrying the spear of Russ and the scent of Fenris clinging to him like frost. The warp answered him with laughter. He hunted demons across landscapes made of regret and memory. He tore down fortresses built from lies whispered to dying gods. He tracked echoes of his traitor brothers, following their shadows through nightmares stitched from shame and blood. The Eye tried to unmake him, not by force alone, but by temptation. It showed him Fenris in flames, showed him Guilliman crowned emperor, showed him the wolves broken, kneeling to inquisitors who wore smiles sharper than knives. But Russ did not kneel. He bled. And blood has meaning in the warp. With every battle he won, something was taken in return. Not strength, never that, but clarity. Certainty, the clean simplicity of loyalty and rage began to fracture. He learned truths the Emperor had buried. He saw the scaffolding behind reality, the lies necessary to keep mankind alive. He learned that the warp was not merely hell, but a reflection. The darker humanity became, the deeper the abyss grew. And humanity had grown very dark. There were moments uncounted and unmeasured when Russ doubted his oath. Moments when the Wolf King wondered if the Emperor had known this end was inevitable. That the Primarchs were never meant to save mankind, only delay its extinction. The Eye whispered then, soft as falling snow. It promised endings. It promised release. Russ answered with his spear. But when at last he found what he had been hunting, when the truth rose before him like a black sun, it did not bleed. It spoke. The Wolf King emerged, changed. Not all at once, not in some thunderous rebirth. His return began as a wound in reality, a slow tearing of space above Fenris's northern pole. Warp lightning clawed at the heavens. Void shields screamed in protest. The Fang's ancient augurs, relics older than most chapters, began to weep static and prophecy. From the rupture fell something vast. Not a ship, not a man. A presence. Ice hardened beneath it. Storms bent away, and when form finally coalesced, it was Leman Russ, yet not the Russ of murals and sagas. His armor was fractured and reforged, plates etched with symbols no Imperial lexicon recognized. Frost clung to him, not as decoration, but as if reality itself recoiled from his heat. One eye burned with cold starlight. The other was shadowed, deep as the void between galaxies. His spear was gone. In its place, he carried a blade that drank the air around it, edges whispering with restrained annihilation. The wolves that gathered did not approach at first. They circled, hackles raised, instincts screaming contradiction. This was their king. And this was something that had walked where even gods did not return unchanged. Russ knelt. The ground broke beneath the weight of it, not the kneel of fealty, but of exhaustion. Blood, blackened with warp taint and yet blazing with impossible vitality, splashed across the ice. When he lifted his head, his voice was quieter than Fenris had ever known. "I have failed," he said. Across the stars, the Imperium shuddered. Astropaths died screaming his name. Navigators went blind, sobbing about a wolf-shaped eclipse devouring the Astronomican's light. Deep within the warp, ancient powers turned their gaze, not with triumph, but with unease. Something had been taken from them, something they could not reclaim. Russ had not returned with salvation. He returned with a warning. In the days that followed, the Space Wolves watched their Gene Father rise again, not to feast or celebrate, but to walk alone through the Fang's deepest halls, speaking with no one. When he finally summoned his sons, his presence weighed on them like a winter that would never end. He spoke of wars yet to come, of doors opening that should have remained sealed, of a choice the Imperium would soon face, one that could not be won by bolter or blade. He spoke of the Emperor, not as a god, not even as a father, but as a prisoner. Some among the wolves raged, others wept. The rune priests felt their souls tilt toward something vast and terrible. Russ silenced them with a look that carried the weight of annihilated worlds. "The eye did not break me," he said, "but it showed me what will." Far away, beneath the golden throne, ancient machines stirred without command. The corpse god's withered form twitched just once, as if some distant howl had reached even him. And deep in the warp, something answered, not with laughter this time, but with fear, because the Wolf King had returned carrying a truth sharp enough to kill gods, and the galaxy was not ready to hear it. Not yet. And as the storms above Fenris thickened and Russ turned his gaze toward Terra, one question echoed unspoken across 1,000,000 battlefields. Was Leman Russ humanity's last protector, or its final executioner? The silence after his words was heavier than any bombardment. It pressed into the great halls of the Fang, into ceramite and bone, into gene-forged hearts that had never known hesitation. The wolves had faced demons, tyrannids, traitor legions, but never this. Never doubt spoken by the one who had taught them to roar at the dark. Russ turned from them before any could answer. His steps echoed like distant thunder as he descended alone, deeper than even Bjorn the Fell-Handed had been allowed to walk. Down into vaults cut not just from rock, but from memory. Doors sealed during the Great Crusade groaned open as if recognizing him, sigils igniting with pale Fenrisian blue. The air grew colder. Not Fenris cold. This was deeper, stiller. A cold that remembered stars before they burned. At the heart of the vault waited an altar no mortal had built. Stone met metal met something else entirely, its surface shifting when unobserved. Here lay relics Russ himself had forbidden his sons to touch, gifts and warnings left behind by a visiting brother long ago. Magnus. Russ paused before the altar, jaw tightening. Memories pressed in. Prospero burning, red skies split by betrayal, his brother's scream echoing through psychic stormfire. For 10,000 years, rage had anchored that memory. Now something else stirred beneath it. Regret. He placed his gauntleted hand upon the altar, and the warp recoiled. For a breathless moment, Fenris itself seemed to hold still. Images flooded his mind, not visions, but truths stripped of ceremony. The Emperor on Terra, radiant yet hollow, bound to the throne by machinery and sacrifice neither he nor his sons had ever fully understood. The Astronomican's light dimming, not from attack, but from exhaustion. A galaxy running on borrowed time, fed by endless blood. And beneath it all, a choice deferred for millennia. Russ staggered back. His breath fogged the air, each exhale a snarl restrained by will alone. This was what the Eye had taught him, not how to win the long war, but why it could not be won as the Imperium imagined. Behind him, steel scraped stone. Bjorn the Fell-Handed emerged from the shadows, ancient sarcophagus humming with restrained power. The oldest living memory of the Legion regarded his gene-father with optics that had once seen the Emperor smile. "You carry the weight of graves," Bjorn rumbled, "and you do not carry it alone." Russ did not turn. "I should have listened to Magnus." The words hung like a crack through reality itself. Bjorn was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, layered with centuries. "Then tell me what you have learned, my lord, before the galaxy tears itself apart trying to guess." Russ finally faced him. In that moment, Bjorn saw it clearly. Not corruption, not madness, but something far more dangerous. Understanding. "The Emperor is dying," Russ said. "Not as men understand it. He is being consumed by his purpose. And when he finally breaks, the light will not go out gently." Beyond Fenris, events were already accelerating. On Terra, the High Lords bickered as they always had, blind to the tremor passing through the foundations of the Imperial palace. Tech priests reported fluctuations in the throne's feedback systems, microseconds of silence where there should have been eternal strain. The Inquisition silenced them. Silence, after all, was how the Imperium survived. But Leman heard. Far from Fenris, the Lord Commander of the Imperium knelt before the Golden Throne, one gauntlet pressed to cold marble. He felt it there, a pressure behind the eyes, like a voice that could not speak words anymore. Leman had borne this burden since his resurrection, the unbearable knowledge of what the Imperium had become. Now something else layered atop it. Recognition. "My brother," Leman whispered. "What have you brought back with you?" The warp answered him before Russ could. Across rift and reality, storms began to bend, not toward the Eye, but away from it. Demon worlds experienced impossible calms. In some hell realms, armies found their weapons turning to frost in their hands. The ruinous powers watched their dominions react with instincts they had not programmed. Fear spread, not among mortals, but among gods. Russ began to move. He did not call his legion to crusade. He did not raise banners or issue decrees. Instead, he walked Fenris, speaking to the tribes as he once had, listening more than he commanded. He sat among the lowest thralls and the greatest jarls alike, asking questions no Primarch had ever asked aloud. What would you become if the Emperor were gone? Each answer cut him in a different way. There were those who said they would fight on regardless. Others who admitted in whispers that they did not know. Russ realized then what the Imperium's greatest lie had been, not that the Emperor was a god, but that humanity could not choose without him. That lie had shaped 10,000 years of obedience. One night, beneath an aurora twisted into unfamiliar colors, Russ returned to the Fang and summoned the rune priests. He allowed them into his thoughts. Not fully, but enough. They screamed as one. Visions struck them like axe blows, the Astronomican imploding into a psychic supernova. Terra becoming a beacon not of guidance but annihilation. Warp tides flooding real space, not as invasion, but as consequence. And standing at the center of it, not the Emperor, but Russ. When the visions released them, the priests collapsed, weeping, bleeding from eyes and ears. Russ stood unmoving, weathering the truth as he always had, by standing in its path. You showed us the end, one croaked. Why? Because it is not fixed, Russ replied. Yet. Another truth emerged soon after, carried not by prophecy, but by blood. From the far edge of the great rift came a fleet that did not answer hails. Hulls bore markings older than the heresy, corrupted and altered by warp truths that defied Mechanicus logic. At their head sailed a vessel whose silhouette froze every space wolf who saw it. The Hrafnkel, Russ's lost flagship. It burned through Fenrisian void defenses without firing a shot, its presence alone causing Vox systems to howl with memory echoes, laughter, battle cries, the voices of wolves long dead. When it finally halted above Fenris, a single transmission cut through the storm. "My king," said a voice thick with reverence and venom, "you left us." Russ looked skyward, expression unreadable. "I told you to guard the gate," he said quietly. On the Hrafnkel's bridge stood warriors who wore his colors, his sigils, his totems, but twisted, refined into something colder, more absolute. They called themselves the Einherjar, wolves who had followed Russ into the Eye and learned a different lesson from survival. They had not come to kneel. They had come to finish what he began. As thunder rolled across Fenris and the two legacies of the Wolf King aligned on a collision course, Russ felt something he had not allowed himself since the Great Crusade. Doubt, not in his strength, but in his right to decide the fate he had glimpsed. Because if the choice belonged to humanity, then even a Primarch had no right to make it alone. And somewhere far beneath Terra, the Golden Throne began to fail, slowly, deliberately, as if giving the galaxy one last chance to act before the truth arrived in full. Part of Russ had known this moment would come. He had just hoped it would not come so soon. The void above Fenris fractured into motion. The Hrafkel drifted closer, its hull scarred by millennia of impossible warfare, runes etched so deep they seemed grown rather than carved. Fenrisian escorts held formation but did not advance. No one gave the order. No one needed to. Every Auspex reading screamed the same impossible truth. The ship was saturated with the warp, yet stable, as if the Eye itself had learned restraint. Russ stood at the Fang's highest bastion, wind tearing at his cloak, snow hissing against armor warmed by something deeper than heat. He felt the ship before he saw it clearly, a pressure behind the sternum, a pulse that matched his own heart's. They were his sons, and they were wrong. The Vox crackled again, closer now, clearer. "You walked into the dark and left us to interpret your silence," the voice said. "We became what was required." Russ closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting memory bleed through. Faces half remembered. Warriors he had trusted to hold the line while he hunted truths too dangerous to share. He had believed loyalty would be enough. The warp had taught them otherwise. "Open your shields," Russ said, his voice carrying through the storm without amplification. "Land. We will speak." Laughter answered him, not mockery, but conviction sharpened into something pitiless. "We will," the voice replied, "but not as supplicants." The descent was violent. The Hrafnkel tore through the clouds like a falling blade, frost crystallizing across its prow as warp energy sheathed its hull. When it struck the ice fields below the Fang, the impact cracked glaciers kilometers away. Ramps slammed down, figures emerged. They wore the pelts of wolves long dead, eyes glowing with cold purpose. Their armor bore runes that crawled when unobserved, sigils of binding rather than worship. These were not corrupted warriors. They were disciplined, refined, terrible in their certainty. Russ descended to meet them alone. The leader stepped forward, helm retracting to reveal a scarred face marked with Fenrisian tattoos overlaid by symbols no rune priest would claim. His gaze locked onto Russ with reverence that curdled into accusation. "You were our compass," the warrior said, "and you vanished." I went to ensure your future, Russ replied, and learned, the warrior shot back, that there is no future without choice. The words struck deeper than a blade. Russ realized then the cruel symmetry of it. The eye had taught him restraint, nuance, patience. It had taught them resolve, finality. Where he had learned the cost of godhood, they had learned its necessity. Bjorn's presence rumbled behind Russ, weapons primed but unmoving. Wolves lined the battlements, tense, divided by blood they could not deny. The Einherjar knelt, one knee touching ice in perfect unison, but their heads remained lifted. We know about Terra, their leader said. We know the throne is failing. We know the Emperor suffers not because he must, but because the Imperium refuses to choose. Russ said nothing. We have seen the end, the Einherjar continued. In 1,000 variations, the galaxy burns slower under indecision, faster under action. Either way, it burns. A pause. The wind howled between them. So we came to offer you the crown you abandoned. The realization hit with brutal clarity. They did not want guidance. They wanted permission. Across the stars, Leman felt it, an old psychic scar splitting open. Reports flooded his strategium of Space Wolf successor chapters refusing orders, withdrawing to Fenrisian space. Navi's nobilite roots bent subtly, involuntarily, toward a single convergence point. Fenris was becoming an axis. On Terra, alarms chimed softly, politely, as systems designed never to fail began to do precisely that. The Adeptus Mechanicus argued whether this constituted malfunction or revelation. The Emperor did not answer their prayers. Russ looked at the kneeling warriors and saw himself reflected, not as he had been, but as he might have become, had the eye shown him only one truth. You believe I must lead humanity, Russ said. Rule it. Decide its ending. Yes, the Einherjar leader said simply. Because you have seen what no other living soul has survived seeing, and because you are still standing. Russ stepped forward. Ice cracked beneath his boots. He reached out, not for a weapon but for the warrior's helm, fingers closing around ceramite warmed by warp touch. I survived, Russ said, voice low, fierce, by learning that survival is not victory. The Einherjar stiffened. You mistake restraint for weakness, the warrior growled. No, Russ replied. I mistake certainty for cowardice. The words detonated among them. Several Einherjar rose halfway before halting, confusion rippling through their ranks. Russ pressed on, each word measured, heavy with purpose. The warp did not break me because it could not decide who I was. You let it decide for you. You turned necessity into doctrine. The leader's eyes burned. We did what you would not. I did what I could not afford to, Russ answered. There is a difference. The wind died. For a heartbeat, Fenris held its breath. Then the ground trembled, not from the Raffenkel, not from Russ, but from somewhere far deeper. Ancient mechanisms beneath the fang awakened, responding not to gene code or command, but to intent. Visions tore through the minds of every psyker on the planet. Not the end, but a crossroads. A moment balanced on the edge of annihilation or transformation. And at its center, not the Emperor, not chaos, but humanity itself. Russ staggered as the truth crystallized fully at last. The choice the eye had shown him was never his to make, nor Gilliman's, nor even the Emperor's. The throne was not a prison, it was a delay, a crucible holding back a truth humanity was not yet ready to face. That the warp could only be mastered by a species willing to confront itself without gods. The Einherjar saw it too, their certainty shattered, not into doubt but into terror. If you do not lead us, their leader whispered, voice cracking for the first time, then what are we? Russ released his helm. You are free, he said, and that frightens you. Above them, the aurora split, light folding inward toward a single burning point in the sky. Astropaths across the Imperium screamed as one, sensing something ancient shifting posture, not awakening, not dying, preparing. Deep within the golden throne, something changed. Not a failure, not a surge, but a release. A fraction of burden lifted, as if a hand long clenched had eased its grip. Russ felt it instantly. So did the gods. The ruinous powers recoiled, not from attack, but from implication. If the throne was no longer absolute, if humanity's fate was no longer singular, then their war was no longer inevitable. Russ turned toward the horizon, eyes reflecting a future fracturing into possibility and ruin in equal measure. Behind him stood two legacies of the Wolf King, one forged by restraint, one by resolve, both suddenly unmoored. For the first time since the Great Crusade, Leman Russ did not see a path forward, only a moment of choice approaching faster than any blade. And he knew, with cold certainty, that when it arrived, the galaxy would not survive unchanged. The aurora above Fenris collapsed inward, light folding like a wounded banner, colors draining until only a dull, aching white remained. The sky did not darken. It tightened, as if reality itself were drawing breath. Russ felt the pressure settle into his bones. Around him the wolves waited, not for orders, but for permission to exist in a world that had just shifted its weight. The Einherjar stood rigid, no longer confident, no longer defiant. Their armor hummed with restrained power that now felt directionless, like blades raised after the enemy has vanished. Silence spread, broken only by the distant thunder of glaciers carving into the sea of claws. Somewhere deep beneath the fang, ancient engines adjusted their balance, responding to a command that had not been spoken aloud. Bjorn's optics flickered as data streams poured through him. Energetic fluctuations across the Imperium, subtle but accelerating. Warp currents bending, choirs falling out of perfect synchronization. The delay was ending. Russ turned slowly, surveying the faces of his sons, those born of Fenris and those hardened by hell. He did not see traitors or loyalists. He saw fragments of humanity sharpened into weapons, all pointed vaguely toward the same burning horizon. "We are out of time," Russ said. The words did not carry fear. They carried acceptance, and that frightened them far more. A new voice cut through the air, sharp as breaking ice. A rune priest staggered forward, blood leaking from his nose, eyes unfocused with visions still tearing through him. "My king," he gasped, "the Astronomicon, its light is fluctuating in patterns, not random, deliberate." Russ closed his eyes. He felt it too now, clearer than before. The Emperor's presence, no longer a single crushing weight, but something strained, diffused, as though attention had been divided. As if the being entombed upon the throne were no longer holding the line alone. "I warned him," Russ murmured, half to himself. "Long ago. I told him there would come a time when control would break before corruption did." Bjorn shifted, massive form casting a long shadow over the ice. "Is this that time?" Russ did not answer immediately. He was listening to echoes only he could hear, to the distant howl of the warp responding not with rage, but with calculation, forces realigning, plans redrawn by entities that had never believed adaptation necessary. Then came the scream, not from Fenris, not from Terra, from everywhere. Astropathic choirs across the Imperium collapsed as one, minds flooded by a singular, undeniable truth. Something had changed the rules. Messages fractured mid-thought, coordinates twisted, fleets emerged from warp translation, light years off target, some too close to stars, others drifting in voids that should not exist. Leman stood at the center of his strategium as reports cascaded like falling masonry. He felt the pressure building behind his eyes, the sensation of standing beneath a sky heavy with storm. "This isn't chaos," he said quietly. "This is response." An aide dared to ask the unaskable. Response to what, Lord? Leman thought of Russ, of the old wolf's laugh, his recklessness, his infuriating refusal to bend. And then of the change he had felt across the void, a presence no longer moving along a single vector. "To freedom," Leman said, "or the threat of it." Back on Fenris, the Einherjar leader took a step forward, voice low, urgent. "If the throne releases its hold, there will be no center, no singular will to bind humanity together. You know what comes after." "Fragmentation," Russ said. "Choice, failure, growth." The warrior shook his head. "Those are luxuries of peace, not survival." Russ met his gaze, eyes hard. "Survival without choice is extinction wearing delay as armor." A tremor rippled through the ice beneath them, sharper this time. The Fang's ancient shields flared instinctively, not against external threat, but against something resonating from within Fenris itself. The world spirit stirred, not violently, but attentively. Russ felt his heart's hammer. Fenris had always been more than a world. It was a trial, a forge, a place designed to produce a certain kind of humanity, resilient, adaptive, unyielding, a proof of concept. The Emperor had never said it aloud, but Russ understood now. The delay had always been meant to end. Another rune priest screamed and collapsed. Russ caught him before he struck the ice, visions pouring through the contact. Terror wreathed in psychic stormlight, not as a beacon but as an opening. The golden throne no longer anchoring the warp, but peeling it back, layer by layer, revealing something vast imprisoned beneath belief itself. Not a god, a mirror. Russ released the priest, hands trembling slightly. For the first time since his return, uncertainty cut through him, not doubt of what must be done, but fear of what would follow regardless. The Einherjar leader watched him closely. "You see it now. The choice cannot be postponed. If you will not lead us, others will." "Yes," Russ said softly, "they will." That truth settled like fresh snow over a battlefield. Somewhere in the warp, ancient intelligences converged. Not allies, not rivals, but predators circling a wounded idea. If humanity was about to define itself without divine constraint, then it would either become unreachable or irresistibly vulnerable. The ruinous powers began to move in ways the galaxy had never recorded, not toward terror, toward humanity itself, its dreams, its doubts, its potential. The storm was not coming. It was already here. Russ straightened, towering once more, presence settling into something immovable. He looked past the Einherjar, past the wolves, toward the distant stars no longer fixed in their ancient patterns. "Fenris will hold," he said, "not as a fortress, as a beginning." Bjorn turned his massive frame toward him. "And Terra?" Russ did not answer at once. Above Fenris, the aurora ignited again, this time burning gold and blue, streaks of light bending inward toward an unseen focal point somewhere between stars and souls. The Astronomicon flared, not brighter but broader, its light scattering into countless threads instead of a single beam. Humanity's signal was changing. Across the Imperium, men and women felt it in different ways, a sudden sense of vertigo, of possibility, of dread. Some wept, some laughed, some reached for weapons or prayers or each other. Russ felt them all. "My brother will choose his path," Russ finally said. "As will humanity." The Einherjar stiffened. "And you?" Russ looked at his hands, at scars earned across realities, at blood shed in the Emperor's name, at futures balanced on his restraint. "I will ensure there is still a world left to choose from." The Fang's ancient gates began to open, not outward, but inward, revealing depths never recorded, vaults sealed not for danger, but for timing. Weapons hummed awake that had slept since before the heresy. Not doomsday engines, but tools meant to stabilize, to anchor, to give space rather than dominate it. Russ took his first step toward them. Somewhere far away, beneath Terra, the golden throne emitted a sound it had never made before. Not a scream, not a failure, a breath. And as that breath was drawn, the galaxy leaned forward, waiting to see whether it would be exhaled as liberation or as the final howl before everything broke. The breath from the golden throne rippled outward, not as light, not as sound, but as recognition. Russ felt it strike him like a hand placed gently, deliberately against his chest, for an instant that stretched beyond time. Fenris vanished. The fang dissolved into memory and stone, wolves into echoes, the sky into a vast and silent chamber of thought. Russ stood somewhere that was not a place, facing a presence that had not looked at him directly since the day he turned away to walk into the eye. The Emperor was not a throne here. He was a shape of intention, fractured yet immense, radiating not command but exhaustion. A will that had been holding a door closed for 10,000 years, with nothing left to brace against it but sacrifice. "You understand now," came the thought, not in words but in pressure and warmth and terrible clarity. Russ did not kneel. He stood as he always had before his father, head high, spine straight, defiance tempered by love sharpened into honesty. "I do," Russ answered, his voice carrying across layers of reality. "And you should have trusted us with it sooner." A flicker passed through the Emperor's presence. Not anger, something closer to regret. "I chose certainty over growth, control over risk. I feared what humanity would become without me." Russ's hands clenched. So did I. Images unfolded between them, not as prophecy but as record. Humanity's ascent and stagnation, faith calcifying into chains, hope outsourced to divinity, progress arrested by obedience. The mirror beneath the throne revealed itself fully now. Not a weapon, not a trap, but a psychic amplification of humanity's collective identity. The throne had never been meant to rule the warp. It had been meant to teach humanity how to see itself reflected there. The Emperor's will wavered. For the first time in millennia, he was not forcing the galaxy into alignment. He was letting it decide whether it wanted him at its center at all. Russ felt the weight of that choice press against his heart, against every scar and oath. He saw the outcomes branching like frost across glass. Some ended in fire, some in silence. A few, only a few, glimmered with something fragile and terrifying. "Change. I will not rule them," Russ said, "and I will not replace you." The Emperor's presence dimmed slightly, as if relieved. "Then stand with them, not above them." Reality crashed back into Russ like a wave. Fenris returned. Ice, wind, the howl of wolves, the grinding strain of ancient engines beneath the fang. Around him, the world trembled as the aurora overhead twisted into a vast spiral, light pouring inward toward Fenris as if the planet itself were becoming a stabilizing mass in the warp. The wolves stared in awe and terror. The Einajar dropped fully to their knees. Russ staggered once, then steadied, eyes burning with something no one present had ever seen in a Primarch before. Vulnerability. "The throne is opening," Russ said, voice carried across the ice by forces beyond sound. "Not to end the Imperium, to end its dependence." The words rolled outward, picked up by astropathic echoes, whispered into the minds of navigators, seers, commanders, civilians. Not instructions, an understanding. Across the Imperium, humanity felt itself seen. On Terra, Leman cried out as the golden throne flared, not violently but expansively. The Astronomicon fractured into countless lesser lights, each one faint, imperfect, alive, Navigation became harder, not easier, safer, not safer, but possible without worship. Guilliman understood then, his jaw tightened, heart heavy and blazing in equal measure. "So this is the cost," he whispered, "and the gift." In the warp, the ruinous powers screamed, not in triumph, in rage. Their eternal prey was slipping its leash. Demons tore themselves apart, trying to force old patterns to reassert. Gods lashed out, collapsing empires of nightmare to reclaim control. But the mirror no longer showed a single reflection. It showed billions. Fenris buckled as a backlash tore through the Imperium. Ice fields shattered, mountains groaned. The Fang's shields flared white-hot as something vast tried to reach through the thinning veil, not to conquer, but to stop what had already begun. The Einherjar rose as one, weapons igniting, eyes alight with renewed purpose. Not conquest, defense. Russ lifted his hand, stopping them. "This moment is not won with blades," he said. "This moment is endured." The ground split. A rift tore open beneath the aurora, not like the Eye of Terror, not a wound, but an incision, clean, precise. Through it surged warp energy stripped of malice, raw and unstable. Humanity's reflection, unfiltered. Minds across Fenris screamed, then steadied. Fear surged, then receded, replaced by something unfamiliar. Choice. Russ stepped forward, alone, standing at the edge of the rift as wind tore at his armor, frost crystallizing across his pauldrons. He felt himself unraveling at the seams, Primarch flesh straining under concepts too large for singular embodiment. He smiled grimly. So be it. He drove his blade into the ice, not as a weapon, as an anchor. Runes ignited along the blade's length, not Fenrisian, not Imperial, but human, symbols pulled unconsciously from countless minds reaching for meaning without prayer. The Fang's ancient mechanisms surged, not amplifying him, but distributing the load. Russ roared, not in rage but in exertion, as warp pressure crashed against him like a tidal wave. His knees buckled, his vision bled white. The Einherjar moved without orders, forming a ring around him, feeding discipline, clarity, belief not in gods but in each other into the widening resonance. The wolves howled, voices raw, grounding the storm in flesh and blood, and stubborn refusal to break. Bjorn planted himself behind Russ, ancient servos screaming. "You will not fall alone," he rumbled. Across the Imperium, ordinary people felt the storm crest and pass, a migraine that faded, a dream that ended, a moment of vertigo resolved not into madness, but into quiet resolve. The rift stabilized, then slowly, impossibly, it began to close. Not sealed, not erased, but integrated, folded into reality like a scar that would never fully fade. Russ sagged as the pressure released, collapsing to one knee. Snow hissed against armor heated to the brink of failure. His breath came heavy, ragged, but he was smiling. Above Fenris, the aurora softened, colors bleeding back into familiar patterns. The Astronomican's new light steadied, fragile but present. The warp did not retreat. It adapted. The crisis passed, not resolved, not ended, but transformed. Russ looked around at his sons, at confusion, awe, fear, and fragile hope written across their faces. "This is not victory," he said quietly. "This is responsibility." The Einherjar bowed their heads, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Far away on Terra, the Golden Throne dimmed slightly, not failing, not silent, resting. For the first time since the heresy, the Emperor was no longer carrying humanity alone. Russ rose slowly, every movement heavy with cost. He gazed at the stars, still dangerous, still unforgiving, still full of monsters and war, but no longer predetermined. "The age of certainty is over," he murmured. "What comes next will be harder." The wind eased. Wolves lowered their heads. And as Fenris settled into uneasy calm, the galaxy exhaled, not in relief, but in readiness. Because the future had just become unwritten, and humanity, at last, would have to decide what it was worth writing. The stars did not return to where they had been. That was the first thing Russ noticed in the days that followed. Constellations familiar since the age of strife now drifted a fraction out of alignment, subtle enough that only navigators and wolves noticed at first. It was not damage, it was consequence. The universe had shifted its weight, and nothing that mattered could pretend otherwise. Fenris endured. The ice healed slowly, seams of blue crystal sealing the scars where the rift had touched the world. The Fang's ancient engines wound down into a deeper, quieter rhythm, no longer straining against catastrophe but breathing alongside it. Wolves returned to their hunts. Tribes lit fires and told stories that sounded older than history and newer than prophecy at the same time. Russ walked among them without guards. He did not sit upon thrones or issue laws. He listened. He watched hands work leather and steel. He drank from the same bowls he had centuries ago, tasting familiarity tempered by change. Many came to kneel before him. He bade them stand. Some wept. He let them. At night, Russ stood alone on the ice and gazed skyward, feeling the soft thrum of countless lesser lights that now shared the Astronomican's burden. Imperfect signals, human signals. Fragile, but alive. Far away, Terra learned to breathe differently. The Golden Throne still existed, the Emperor still endured, but the silence around him had changed. Leman felt it when he knelt, not absence, but space. The crushing weight of singular destiny had eased into something shared. He rose from that chamber not enlightened, not comforted, but resolved. The Imperium did not become gentler overnight. Wars did not cease, tyrants did not repent, fear did not vanish. But across 1,000,000 worlds, small deviations emerged. Commanders hesitated before exterminating populations they had once erased without thought. Priests argued doctrine instead of simply enforcing it. Navigators began training successors not as vessels of holy sight, but as skilled, fragile humans with limits and choices. The gods of the warp watched their prey grow difficult. Some raged, some adapted. One or two fell silent, studying the reflection of humanity, no longer bound to a single blinding image of itself. On Fenris, the Einherjar laid down the doctrines they had carved from hell. They did not disarm, they did something far harder. They questioned, they asked Russ what he wanted them to become. Russ answered honestly. "I do not know," he said. And that answer somehow steadied them more than any command ever had. Bjorn the Fell-Handed stood with Russ one twilight as auroras rippled gently overhead, colors soft now, no longer screaming. The ancient dreadnought's voice was quieter than thunder, heavier than stone. "The saga will remember this differently," Bjorn said. "They always do." Russ smiled faintly. "Good. Truth rarely survives intact." Bjorn's optics glowed steadily. "Do you regret it?" Russ was silent for a long time. He thought of the Emperor, no longer alone in eternal suffering. Of Leman, bearing responsibility without illusions of control. Of humanity, standing before itself for the first time without a god demanding obedience in exchange for survival. "No," Russ said at last, "but I fear it." "That fear will shape the age," Bjorn replied. Russ nodded. "As it should." The Wolf King did not announce another departure, but one morning, his footprints ended at the edge of the Sea of Claws. Not vanished, simply turned away from view. Ships reported sightings that could not be confirmed. Warriors dreamed of a great wolf walking between stars, not hunting, not ruling, watching, ensuring the choice remained possible. Legends spread, as they always would. Some claimed Russ had become something more than Primarch, less than God. Others said he waited for the day humanity faltered, ready to end what he had begun. Most simply told stories by firelight about a king who returned not with answers, but with responsibility. And that frightened them. Because responsibility cannot be worshipped, it can only be carried. The galaxy rolled on, vast and indifferent and filled with terrible beauty. Empires rose, empires decayed. Humanity stumbled, argued, fought, and occasionally chose better than it had before. No prophecy guaranteed survival anymore. No throne promised salvation, only a question echoing softly through warp and soul alike. What does a species become when it no longer kneels, yet still dares to hope? Somewhere beyond Fenris's skies, beneath stars that no longer pointed the way alone, a lone figure paused, listening to the quiet heartbeat of a future no god could fully control. And for the first time since the beginning of war, the universe did not answer with certainty. It waited,